Welcome back to Tide Pod on the YouTube home of Tide Illustrated. Jack Knowlton and Tony Tsoukalis. And Tony, we got a taste of fall for Alabama's first spring practice that we got to view. We're going to talk some spring practice. We'll talk Tide Hoops losing to Florida in a second as well. But Tony, it was a taste of fall. It was very chilly on Wednesday when we got to go out and watch the team for about 10, 15 minutes practice and get after it for their second day out there. Of course, to start this spring, they'll practice through April 12th, and they'll have the A-Day game, in quotes, day, festivities, whatever you're going to call it these days with how spring games work. But it was nice to be able to see some football for the first time in a couple of months, see Alabama back out there, a lot of new faces, obviously some new coaches, which one we're going to talk about because we got to talk to him after practice. But I wanted to start there, Tony. Obviously, you don't want to overread into a 10-minute viewing portion, the second practice of the spring, but that was what we got to watch, and there was still plenty of things to kind of glean. I know you wrote a takeaways. Just wanted to start there. We were both watching, but what were some of your thoughts, takeaways from what you got to see, position groups, players, etc.?
Yeah, it's kind of almost a roll call of sorts, because we're not seeing any like secret plays or, 11 on 11 or anything like that. So we're just seeing different things. Anyone that tells you, you'll hear a lot of takes from things like this, and they'll be like, oh, I thought Ty Simpson was throwing a better ball than Keelan Russell, or I thought Keelan Russell was throwing a better ball than Austin Mack, or vice versa. But, no, they're throwing against air. They're throwing to receivers. I mean, occasionally there'll be a great pass. Maybe there'll be an off-target pass, but like it's pretty straightforward when we're looking at stuff like that. So just know that like a lot of this is roll call. A lot of this is just seeing who's out there. I mean, to talk about the quarterbacks first, I guess they all look pretty decent. When they're throwing, they're a little bit farther away because we're on the outdoor fields. And when they're indoor, we get to see them close up throwing the ball. This time we got to see them throw it. It was a windy day too. It wasn't just cold. Seemed like they were managing that. I didn't see any, bad throws. It didn't seem like the wind was really affecting anything. So I thought it was pretty solid from what I saw from the quarterbacks. It was as you expected. Ty Simpson first, Austin Mack second, Keelan Russell third. That's just seniority. But it's also probably where they stand on the depth chart. No surprises there. There was a few extra absences, like Alabama has, 12 people, 13 people, I can't remember now, that are out for the spring that Kalen DeBoer announced on Monday. There's a few more of them. Wilkin Formby and Yanzi Pierre were not at the viewing period. And look, this offensive line already doesn't have Caden Proctor. So without Wilkin Formby, it got pretty, pretty creative, I guess. The first unit from what we saw was Arkle Anungwam, the Ball State transfer at left tackle. Olis Alanin, if you remember him, he came in from Finland a couple years ago at left guard. Then you had Parker Brailsford at center, Jaden Roberts at right guard, and you had Casey Poe, a freshman last year, at right tackle. So that's that will not be your offensive line heading into the fall, but it's kind of interesting. I mean, Anungwam is kind of he is viewed as a project kind of guy. And he's going to get a lot of reps, I think, this spring, just because Alabama doesn't have a lot of tackle bodies. And so he's a tackle body, but he's more of a project guy. He started football late in high school, played a little bit for Ball State last year, but he's kind of, when Alabama brought, this is not the most optimistic comparison because it didn't work out, but Naquil Bertram last year when Alabama brought him in, and he eventually didn't make the team to start the fall, but he was kind of viewed as a project guy. And I think Anungwam is kind of that same guy. I don't expect him to be much of a factor this year, but who knows? I mean, he's got really a projectable build, and I think that he could maybe play into, if he has a really strong spring, maybe he does play himself into that role. The second unit, it was kind of funny when we were looking at the second unit. I actually, sometimes they break it into two different parts. And when I was looking at it, I thought I had saw it wrong. And that second unit was actually the first unit. But it turns out the second unit was Jackson Lloyd, the freshman, the Rivals 100 freshman. Cam Dewberry, the Texas A&M transfer, that was left tackle and left guard. Then you had Joseph Ionetta at center, Gino Vandemark at right guard, and Micah DeBose, another freshman, at right tackle. Also Michael Carroll, the 5-star freshman. I know, I haven't listed him in the first two units, and I know if you're a listener, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, where's the 5-star guy? He saw some time everywhere. I mean, I think he saw some time with the first unit at right tackle, with the second unit at right tackle. Somebody saw him at left tackle. We saw him at right guard with the third unit. I think they're just bouncing him around everywhere. He's a guy that can play. He's got, I think he's 6'6", 315, so he could play tackle. He's more of a guard, but even Kalen DeBoer talked about him as being a guy that could do both. So I think that he might move around. I think he could still compete for that left guard role. But one of the takeaways that I had is I would have expected Jackson Lloyd and Cam Dewberry to maybe be your first team left side. Instead, they're on the second team. We don't know what Alabama is doing, and I don't think that the first team is set. But I would imagine we're going to see a lot of Jackson Lloyd. He's another projectable tackle body, and he's also a Rivals 100 kid. And I think if you're looking for maybe a dark horse of somebody that could step out and earn playing time as a freshman, he's one of those guys. And I think Cam Dewberry, he's a Texas A&M transfer. I think he's probably going to fight for a starting spot too. But, look, you can't just take anything away from Olas Alanin. I think that's it's a big statement that he's getting first team reps as well. And he's a guy that's been behind the scenes, but talk about a guy that came in raw from, Finland, he did his high school up in Connecticut, but hadn't, faced the competition he's facing here. And now he's, got his feet under him. Maybe he's a guy that could shoot up too. And maybe he could compete for that left guard starting role.
Yeah, there was a lot of interesting combos, like you said, to watch for on the offensive line, trying to scratch down numbers and see who is lining up where. And you're right, you can't overreact to it, but it's certainly interesting with guys like Allen and yeah, where Jackson Lloyd ends up, he's one I'm really watching. Obviously, Carroll is a phenomenal athlete. I'll mention more on him in a second. Yeah, the only things I'll really add, I watched a lot of the defensive line. They did some reps with the tackle dummies right in front of some of the media members. We could hear Freddie Roach very clearly barking some orders, getting pretty animated at his guys. There was one moment where Tim Keenan, who was obviously first in every rep and is going to be, kind of the key member of that defensive line. I saw him kind of a leadership moment from him. He was Freddie Roach was given an earful to Steve Mbua. I think that's how you pronounce his name. We're still working on Steve. Big Steve is what I've started referring to him as in conversation.
Even That's
yeah, he's of course he was supposed to come in the 2024 class, had to go to JUCO for a year, and had some academic disconnect because he's from Canada. He came in, obviously really raw guy. He was getting an earful from Freddie Roach. Tim Keenan kind of showed him how to do the drill they were trying to do on the tackle dummies. I thought that was really cool. It's just always cool to see these coaches and players working with each other close up one-on-one. I saw Mo Linguist working with the DBs. And then the only other in that vein as well, guy who really stood out, I think, to everybody who watched freshman-wise was Dijon Lee Jr., the 5-star corner. That dude is built. I mean, we already knew he had a lot of length, but just a ton of size out there for a freshman. Made a couple plays. Our intern Henry caught him nearly snagging an interception against Air. He ended up dropping it, but yeah, he looks absolutely ready for that college level. I know, like Tony, you and I have talked about, maybe he'll make the move to safety. He certainly has the build to play it, but he impressed me just seeing kind of his athleticism and his build for one of the new faces.
Yeah, I mean, he's listed at 6'4", 197, and I was thinking that, there's no way you're going to be able to play cornerback at that size. You see these big cornerbacks, and they always end up moving the safety, but he moved well for his size, and he looks every bit of, I mean, I know Alabama a lot of times like overlist people, and so maybe he's 6'3", but he is a tall guy. He stands out in the cornerback unit, but he doesn't, he's not bulky or stiff when he in his movements. I think he moves well for the cornerback position. He could inevitably play there, but also I think eventually maybe he helps out at cornerback this year. He certainly helps the depth, and he's a 5-star kid, so he's got some talent. He could probably see the field early. But I think that eventually, if you moved him back at safety, you could have two safeties, not this coming season, but next season, in Zay Mincy and Dijon Lee, that were both former cornerbacks that have the size and strength to play safety. You talk about that ball skill, that would be a dangerous duo for the future. I still see that being the case, but I will say in that Dijon Lee is very fluid and can play the cornerback position.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, Well, the theme last year, I feel like, was talking about the defensive backs being versatile and playing all over the field. It seems like that's a theme on the recruiting trail for them as well. That is kind of the players they target. Bigger guys with a lot of athleticism who they can maybe move around depending on what they need to do with that in that specific game week, or just what might be best for their career and how they project. So, yeah, definitely excited to watch Dijon Lee. Another new face I'll point out, Latsier Brooks. I saw him make a one-handed catch. He's been kind of wowing people behind the scenes. There's been videos of him. It was from Keelan Russell too. So perhaps a QB wide receiver duo of the future. He's one of my favorite guys from this 2025 class. I think he's going to be a stud. It might take him a little bit to adjust to the level, but I mean, he makes some athletic catches.
A small receiver who's dynamic, he can make plays in open space wearing the number 17 is going to get going to generate a lot of excitement. I'm sure he's going to have a lot of Jalen Waddle comparisons, and that 17. I wonder if he did that on purpose but he's going to get those comparisons. Obviously, one of the most electrifying players, and he kind of looks like him. So, on the field. So I think that I'm excited to see what we get from Latsier.
Yeah, his coach, a little nugget from his recruitment here, told me, when they were on a visit, Jamarcus Shepard had him in a room, and those players were thrown out there. The Jalen Waddles, the Devontae Smiths, like these just smaller guys who can make big plays. So yeah, he's one I'm excited to see. So a lot of guys shifting around. We saw a lot of new faces, of course. And then we got to meet one of the new faces of the coaching staff for the first time, Tony. Finally, it feels like after two previous attempts of Alabama trying to get him to Tuscaloosa, it's Ryan Grubb, the OC, finally came in this offseason, of course, worked with DeBoer at Washington, was with the Seattle Seahawks in 2024. We finally got to meet him, talked with him for about 10 minutes after practice on Wednesday. What were your initial impressions? I know he made a joke that the third time was the charm there for him, but what were your initial impressions of Ryan Grubb?
Third time's a charm. I thought that was funny. Look, I've seen him described as kind of a grumpier guy, and he seemed a lot more personable than I was expecting. I was expecting him to be a little bit more gruff. He seemed like, I don't want to say this, like maybe it's just my perception. He seemed like younger, and I know he's got the little bit of the gray beard, but he seemed younger and more energetic than I was expecting him to be. I guess I was expecting this rough kind of grumpy, curmudgeon OC brilliant mind kind of guy, and he was a lot more energetic. And one thing I liked about him was that he was honest, and he didn't, we get a lot, especially with this staff, and it's just a style, but we get a lot of like fluffing. You know what I'm saying? When we talk to Jamarcus Shepard, we're going to get high energy, but we're also going to get a little bit of theatrics. And like Ryan Grubb does not give you theatrics. You ask him about Keelan Russell or Michael Carroll, the 2 5-star kids, and he's going to tell you or AK Deer, yep. He's just going to tell you, they need some work. I mean, they're freshmen, he's not going to try to pump them up, or he's going to be real with it. He's going to say, hey, these guys have a lot of potential, but you can't be expecting these big things from players that are in their second college practice ever, So I like that. I like that he didn't just give us this whole fairy tale about how Michael Carroll is just going to walk in and beat everyone up. I mean, he basically said he needs some work. He needs to develop. And the cool thing about Ryan Grubb, too, I think as an offensive coordinator is, yes, he's built these big offenses with quarterbacks and wide receivers that get drafted in the first round. But at his roots, he's an offensive line guy. He started off as an offensive line coach. So he's going to know that part of the game pretty well as well. And I think that's just an interesting, side to him, where most of these offensive coordinators are former quarterbacks, and he's, at his core, like an offensive line guy.
Yeah, that was what I noticed too. I agree. I got a good vibe from Ryan Grubb, and you're right. I think he's going to be kind of straight up with you. If the answer is short, the answer is short, because that's just what the answer is. You're right. There's not going to be any of that added fluff. But that was my big takeaway, was how he talked about the coaches he's working with and has worked with. Because of course it's not just DeBoer, it's Nick Sheridan, who he kind of said is super helpful to him as like a bridge from last year, but also as somebody who, working directly with the quarterbacks, it allows Ryan Grubb, who did emphasize, he wants to spend most of his time with the quarterbacks, but, kind of talked about that dynamic with Sheridan. And when Sheridan's always with the quarterbacks, he's able to go with into other rooms and help out. He talked about his relationship with Chris Kapilovich, the O-line coach, like you said. Seemed like, he's kind of like some O-line coaches can kind of get in their head about you trying to do too much with their unit. And he said Coach Cap and him have gotten along really well, and Jamarcus Shepard he's worked with in Washington too. So seems like he's fitting in well, which, you know, probably shouldn't come as a surprise given his relations to the staff. But I was pretty impressed with him on our first impression. And yeah, it's obviously exciting to have another new face.
You'd have to think that the transition and some of that, you know, you mentioned with Cap, and it's not like Grubb's bringing in a drastically different offense than what Sheridan had, because they had worked together in Washington, and it's really all under Kalen DeBoer's offense as well. So there might be a few extra different, you know, Grubb might favor some things that Sheridan, you know, didn't, or vice versa, but I don't think you're going to get a drastically different thing. So I don't think what Grubb, for example, is asking from the offensive line is all that different than what Sheridan's asking. You know, that would be surprising, because just based on where they both came from the same Kalen DeBoer offense at Washington.
Yeah, no doubt. So that will should in theory certainly make things easier. You know, he had some good words about Ryan Williams in the wide receiver room. We heard him called a sponge again, which I know for a fact Jamarcus Shepard has used that same language. So there you go. The you know, relationship between the two spreads to even how they talk to the media. But yeah, I was overall pretty impressed. And obviously the big question to Ryan Grubb was about the quarterbacks, the unit he said he's gonna work the most with. Of course, the unit that Sheridan is now fully in charge of as his role as the quarterbacks coach. But Tony commented on all three of them. You know, I can sprinkle in the quotes here, but Ty Simpson, Austin Mack, Keelan Russell, you know, what did Ryan Grubb say about them, and what was kind of your vibe? Did you glean anything extra from his comments about the quarterbacks and kind of the battle here, and what did you think about what he said about them?
I like that, you know, we got a breakdown of each one. You know, he had said that Ty Simpson took the biggest step from practice 1 to practice 2. I think that's to be expected. I think we've mentioned this before, but you know, the practice reps and the experience, just in terms of meaningful practice reps, Ty Simpson has such a distinct advantage over the other two guys. And so his ability, his knowledge of the game, his comfortability with the college level is going to be, you know, a big advantage for him. And I think it's going to help him, especially in the early practices. While the other two players are getting their footing, Ty already has his footing. So I think you're going to see, you know, if this was a race, I think you're going to see Ty get off to a fast start. And that, I think what's going to be the case for Alabama in terms of who wins is, can he keep that lead? Because I think you're going to see, you know, if it's a chart, you're going to see Ty Simpson jump out. I wouldn't be surprised right now if you had to do an evaluation, he's like way ahead of the other two. But then once once those guys start playing into their potential and Austin Mack gets comfortable and Keelan Russell gets comfortable, you know, are their ceilings then higher than Ty? And then that's the battle that you find yourself in. But in these early days, it's not surprising to see Ty Simpson. In fact, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, that trajectory even grows a little bit more over the next coming practices. And I don't think we're going to get an update from Ryan Grubb or Kalen DeBoer every single time. And, you know, but I think, you know, if you were able to watch it from behind the scenes, I think you're going to see Ty take a sizable lead over the other two. And then I think towards the end of camp, maybe during the summer, early fall, that's when those other two are going to catch up. And then you'll probably see more of a true quarterback battle. That is, unless Ty Simpson just keeps on skyrocketing, and then he's probably going to lock it up. But no, I liked what he said about that. Obviously, he talked about Keelan's potential. He compared. It's funny that the first person he compared him to, probably somebody that, you know, maybe Alabama fans might not know, is Jake Haener, who plays for the Saints, but was also a Fresno State quarterback under DeBoer and Grubb. He said that they both have the same whippy release. But then he also talked about how Russell has the same vision as Michael Penix. I think everyone knows who Michael Penix is. So those are two good, you know, comparisons. It's nice to know that, you know, he sees the traits of his last two successful quarterbacks in his, which probably is his future quarterback. So that's nice. And then he also talked about Austin Mack. Austin Mack's a guy that, you know, Grubb recruited out of high school. He's always trusted him. He said that he talked about how bright of a kid Austin is, and that, you know, he could tell that he's learned a lot more, you know, and has a lot more knowledge than maybe when he left them at Washington. So that's, you know, all those were encouraging things to hear about each one of those quarterbacks. And it was just kind of interesting to see him break down all of them. We don't always get a full breakdown of a complete room. So it was nice that we got him to comment on each one of those guys.
Yeah, definitely. The biggest thing for me, I think, was the Mac thing where he said, when we brought him in, that was kind of the goal, was to give him, because obviously he graduated early. He was on the younger side. I think he was a 17-year-old freshman at Washington. And the goal of that was to get him with Michael Penix and get him learning from him early. And now coming back to Alabama and re-linking up with Mac, he said he's kind of seen, that sort of transpire, and said he's more mature. He's just made some of those growth. So whenever you end up seeing Mac playing, I mean, I think that's a notable thing for me that at least stood out among the quarterback battles. What other things just in general with Grubb did you like? I know he had a comment about his kind of attacking mindset. I'm sure fans will get excited about that.
Yeah, he did talk about how he wants to be aggressive on offense, and he's done that. He takes shots, he takes chances. They're going to throw the ball deep. They're gonna look for some explosive plays, and he's going to bring that to Alabama. I wish I could have asked him a little bit more. You only get, like, I think, 10 minutes, and we're sharing
Yeah.
questions with everyone. There is this perception that he doesn't run the ball or doesn't like to run the ball, and I'd kind of like to get his take, or the take on that. Obviously, he's going to have to run the ball more in the SEC, but I think he's going to be aggressive with how they do that as well. And so I like, look, obviously he's got a style that's worked. Even when you look at some of the numbers with the Seattle Seahawks, he got fired obviously after one season. You're a Seahawks fan. You probably should be talking about this anyways, but I think he did
I
that
can
with,
weigh in.
yeah, I think he did that with, not to down on your guys, right? But a below average NFL quarterback. He put up decent numbers, and then he also had a banged up running back room. So to be able to kind of make the Seattle Seahawks what it wasn't a perfect offense, but I think he got the most out of it. It was not a great offense. It was a unit that needs a lot of help, and so probably not the most fair firing for him, but Alabama benefits, and I think that they're going to get a guy that could be an NFL offensive coordinator. I think he's got that talent, and so they kind of lucked out. And look, failing in the NFL is not an indication of whether or not you're going to be a good college coach. I mean, look, Nick Saban failed as an NFL head coach, best college coach of all time. Steve Sarkisian didn't really work in the NFL, great in college, now a head coach. Lane Kiffin failed with the Raiders, one of the best offensive coordinators Alabama's ever had, head coach now. So, I mean, Ryan Grubb, I think he's got a brilliant offensive mind, and, I wouldn't be too worried about the fact that it didn't work out for the Seahawks.
Yeah, the thing I tell people with Seattle is, one, their offensive line was one of the worst in football. So, working with that versus coming to Alabama, I think Ryan Grubb, an offensive line guy, like we said, will enjoy that a lot more and get more out of that. But he did a lot of good with a lot of really good receiver weapons too, which I also think Alabama has. You talk about, Ryan Williams, Jeremy Bernard, Isaiah Horton coming in from Miami, going down the list. He got a lot out of that with, a quarterback who has a similar skill set to, a Ty Simpson or a Keelan Russell or an Austin Mack compared to a guy like Jalen Milroe last year. So, I think there's some similarities there in terms of how he can generate some of the same explosiveness that he was able to do in Seattle. And yeah, he'll have a better college offensive line, comparatively to the offensive line that he had in the pros. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of potential for it to be explosive, and it will be interesting with the running back room, because you're totally right. They were banged up in Seattle. And I think, when they were healthy, they actually used it a decent amount. But yeah, we'll see kind of what he starts to say about some of his tendencies. We talked to Jam Miller as well. It was kind of interesting. He talked about him and Richard Young kind of being a true 1-2 again, which, we obviously saw a little bit of last year with Miller and Justice Haynes. Miller kind of rose above Haynes a little bit, but I'd be interested to see what Grubb does with that, if that ends up being they're more on the same playing field, Young and Miller, or if it is just going to be Miller as kind of that bell cow. But
I bet you
we'll
they're
see.
both in the. I would foresee it as a 2, but I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't get much past the 2. I know they brought in the guy from Louisiana Lafayette. What is his name?
Dre Washington.
Dre Washington. I couldn't think of his last name. Yeah, Dre Washington. I think, I don't know. He might be more of an insurance guy.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Daniel Hill. One of the things too, we talked about Dejoun Lee being so big. Daniel Hill is also big. And look,
Yeah.
Alabama doesn't have a strong tight end room. I'm not saying that Alabama should move him to tight end, but that kind of H-back role that Robbie Utes played at the goal line as a blocker, or somebody that you can put a little bit behind the line. I wouldn't mind a two-back system where Daniel Hill's not really playing running back. He's just an extra blocker, kind of like a fullback, but I don't think anybody really uses a fullback anymore. Just, the H-back is now the new fullback, just where he lines up a little bit to the right or left of the quarterback instead of behind. But basically use him in that role as an extra blocker. I think that's probably a good spot for him. So maybe that's where we see him. Guys like AK Deer. Look, I think AK Deer is great. Probably the future of the running back room. Wouldn't expect to see him much this season, and that's not just because Ryan Grubb was short on a description of him. It's hard to break into the running back room as a freshman, especially when there's so many talented guys. I think we probably wait a year before we see AK Deer.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think AK Deer is a legit talent. He just, it will take some time as it does with the freshman. But yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, that was Seattle's biggest area of weakness, was a lot of goal line and red zone stuff. So yeah, maybe having that extra weapon at Alabama in a Daniel Hill to deploy makes things easier for Grubb at the college level. We'll see. But there you go. There are some takeaways from the first spring practice that we got to view, and from Ryan Grubb. Great to finally meet him, finally talk with him as with him as the Alabama OC. It had obviously been long overdue since Nick Saban tried to hire him all the way back in 2023. So exciting times on the football front. We're going to pivot though to hoops to finish the show, Tony, where it is a feeling far from exciting, I think, if you're an Alabama fan. Alabama lost a second game in a row Wednesday night, lost to Florida 99-94 in Coleman on senior night. So a little bit of a bittersweet moment for Mark Sears, Grant Nelson, Clifford Amore, Max Charnowski, the five, and Chris Youngblood. I forgot Chris Youngblood. My apologies, Chris. The five seniors, of course, who got honored after the game. This was another frustrating one. Obviously, a heartbreaker in Knoxville. Played a very, very good Florida team. We knew this was going to be a tough gauntlet for Alabama, but they lose two of these games now, Tony. And I ask you the question that you asked to Nate Oats. I don't want to use the word panic, but should Alabama be panicked about their situation with one game left here in the regular season? What did Nate Oats say about that? What was your take on what he said about it?
Yeah, I mean, so what Nate Oats, whether or not Alabama should be panicked is a different story. But Nate Oats said that he's more concerned with the way Alabama is losing than the losses themselves, the lack of effort, the lack of bounce back. Alabama was out rebounded by 15 on against Florida 50-35, and that was alarming for Nate Oats. He was expecting a better effort from his group, but I mean, he also acknowledged that Alabama's been playing some really hard teams. I mean, what is this? They're coming up on their sixth straight ranked opponent. The last, I think, four were all in the top. But the last three, so you got Tennessee over the weekend, this one against Florida, and then the one coming up against Auburn. They're all top five. So,
yep.
Look, you still need to win some of them. Alabama's lost 4 of its last 6. It's going to be tough to go in to play Auburn. That could be 5 of 7. I mean, it's not great, and I mean, there's a world where they lose against Auburn, somehow get bounced in the first round of the SEC tournament, and you're entering the tournament losing 6 of 8, which is just crazy, for a team that, didn't think you were going to lose 6 times in a season. We'll see how Alabama bounces back. I think the one thing that, and I wrote this in the story, is I have to go back and look. The margin of defeat in the last year's, because last year they went into the NCAA tournament losing 4 out of their last 6. And when you look at the margin of defeat in those games, I think it's something like 15.2. And right now I think it's around 7.5 for this current, the margin of defeat in the 4 recent losses. So you're talking about half the defeat. You had a buzzer beater loss against Tennessee. This game was a game that Alabama, it was such a streaky game, and Alabama had a chance that they were leading at times. It wasn't like they were blown out by this one. even the Auburn game, as dominating as Auburn looked, they had chances to win that Auburn game.
They went on a
I think
run.
the only time they really just got boat race was at Missouri,
Mhm.
But other than that, I mean, and then, that's the worst loss of the season. But other than that, they've been in the other games against really tough opponents. So I mean, you can, 3 top 5 opponents. They've had a chance to win all 3 of them. They've lost all 3 of them. So, what does that say? Yeah, yes, you're a good team, but I think they're gonna have to prove that they are that elite team, that they can win some of those games. I mean, it would certainly be answering that if they could beat Auburn this weekend. Then again, I don't know if I see Auburn losing back-to-back games, and Auburn just lost to Texas A&M. So it's a tough road. I think I'd be slightly maybe rubbing the panic button, ready to press it.
It's the meme of
Maybe,
the guy sweating about to hit it.
yeah. I think that's probably accurate describes it, but we'll see. This is a resilient bunch, and as Nate Oats said, he doesn't have any quit in his team, so he expects them to answer the bell at Auburn this weekend.
Yeah, I've got a kind of a million thoughts that have been racing through my mind since we've talked to Nate. And I appreciate your quantifier of the margin of defeat when you look at last season. And Nate Oates straight up said, and he said a few times this season, he thought they quit last year, which to me just makes the Final Four run all the more wild as how you went all the way down to rock bottom, it seems like, and then, rose back out of it. Maybe the Muhammad Diabate Grand Canyon game was just that inspiring. I don't know. But to me, it's so interesting when I look at this game, because I think you're right. The effort thing, especially on the rebounds, wasn't there in the same way it was against Tennessee. This was a game they knew they needed to rebound well. And this is this is the best team in the country that now people are talking about. Do they have a problem with their work on the glass? Which I don't think they do. I think it was down to an effort thing. But what really struck me was your second question to Nate, where, he kind of said, he talked about this thing with effort, but then said he wasn't really sure where or why they didn't have the energy and why it didn't happen for them tonight. And I'm not sure how you don't have an answer to that question. I mean, he said his team doesn't quit, but at the same time, he's kind of like, we didn't have enough pop. We were too tired. But why are they too tired? I mean, we've heard this before too, after, Missouri, I believe. And then, he kind of said they rested those 2 days, and then they looked a lot more lively against Kentucky. So I don't even really have it in a form of a question. It's just more I'm noticing sort of like a contrast. Like it just seems they go every game where one thing, the effort is really good, but it drops off in another area. And you're right, against elite teams, that's going to cost you. It all has to come together at the same time if you want to beat teams like Florida and Auburn.
I
So I don't know where it is.
I wonder if he was kind of talking a little bit, maybe kind of without mentioning him, Grant Nelson, who is dealing with an injury and looked pretty poor against Florida. You look at some of I don't know how many rebounds did Grant finish with in
4.
that game? 4 rebounds. Yeah. And he just wasn't a presence down low either. He was, allowing blow-bys. He didn't do anything. He looked a shell of himself. He's lost his confidence on offense. He does look tired, or like he lacks energy. I don't know if it's because he's lacking confidence or because he's lacking energy, or a little bit of the both. But I think when Nate was talking a little bit about that, you have to kind of wonder if he's kind of referencing,
If he had Grant in mind there,
or had Grant in mind. And Grant wasn't the only. I mean, Mo Diabate wasn't his normal self, and that didn't help. And I thought Cliff Amore was kind of streaky at times. He'd have some good rebounds and then he'd go missing. So it wasn't just Grant, but I kind of think some of that, and it could go down to injuries. And we don't know, I mean, how many people are banged up on this team. Maybe they're dealing with some other stuff. It certainly helped to get Darian Reed back too, in terms of rebounding and an extra long body, but we'll have to see whenever that happens. But yeah, I think that some of it has to do with being banged up. Another reason why, they didn't win, but they got the double bye in the SEC tournament, and that will help, giving them an extra day. So, we'll see how they look. See how they look in Auburn and see how they look in the SEC tournament. But I think maybe having that rest heading into the SEC tournament might be the thing that they need to recharge.
They were listed as a 2 seed as of this morning when we're recording this by Joe Lenardi and Jerry Palm. I believe Lenardi had Alabama as his second highest 2 seed, right below Tennessee. So that would be the number 6 overall seed. There's been a lot of discourse about this, and I get it's easy to get doom and gloom after 2 losses. I am pretty firm of the belief, and I wouldn't call myself a bracketologist, but I look at this stuff all the time, and I look at the metric stuff all the time. I think you can lose to Auburn. That 7 of 8 losses thing can happen, and you might have a similar vibe that you did to last year in terms of all the losing going into the tournament. I believe they can lose those 2 games and stay a 2 seed regardless. I think their metrics are good enough to do that. I don't think they get jumped. So maybe that helps, take some of the pressure off where to me, you still really can only go up from here. Just
Probably,
whether it's, getting a marquee win against Auburn, going on a little SEC tournament run. And then you say, hey, Florida, I know we lost to them, but you maybe challenge to try and push up to that 1 line, but I don't think they fall below that. But that's just my, when we look at the big picture thing with the bracket, I don't think they fall below a 2 seed. I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, I agree. So you're kind of playing, a little bit freer, and now you're not chasing anything. But you could make the argument. I mean, they were kind of in that situation against Florida, so it didn't really help them there because the
Right.
SEC title was out, and I think, essentially, since they lost and we're still talking about it, they could have lost that game. We didn't really see them play as free at times. But yeah, something's going to have to click, because the way they're playing right now is they're pretty dependent on having a good shooting night. If they would have shot the ball better, they didn't shoot the ball particularly well against Florida. If they had one of those good shooting nights, they would have won even without the rebounds. But you're not going to get those shooting nights throughout the tournament, throughout the SEC tournament, or throughout the NCAA tournament. So you can't get away with being out rebounded or out hustled the way that they were against Florida. So they're going to have to step up some way or another.
Yeah, I mean, just going back into the Florida game, I mean, it was the 3 trends I picked up. I mean, I guess the rebounding wasn't a trend continued from Tennessee because they were good in that area, but the things they did continue that were bad against Tennessee, I think they were, I forget what the exact percentage was overall, but they were 13 of 27 on layups. They shot 68% from the line. They gave up a lot. I think it was 22 fast break points to Florida. So you combine that with the second chance points, almost half of their team's points came on second chances or fast breaks. And then the end of half, too, they go on you mentioned the streakiness. They go on a 9-0 run with a minute and a half to go. Florida scores 5 points in 17 seconds, takes a 41-40 lead to halftime. Alabama tried to rally. They took that lead in the second half. The energy was sucked out of Coleman at that halftime whistle because I think the fans were just kind of like, what just happened? We just had a 4-point lead against this good team going into the break, and they just erased it. Same thing happened against Tennessee. That's another trend that needs to get fixed. I don't know where the answers are, but they have to buck up at the end of the half.
Yeah, look, I think that, the same way that Nate Oats is not concerned about the losses and more concerned about the style of play, if Alabama goes into Auburn and somehow knocks down 18 threes and beats the Tigers, but gets bullied on the boards and, has these, has these breakdowns at the end of the half, I don't think you're instantly like, oh, you beat Auburn on the road. Everything's solved. No, I mean, if you do it, it's kind of how they do that. So, you got to pay attention to the wins too. It's not one of those things like, oh, it's okay that they lost, or, we're not worried about if they lost, we're worried about the performance. And then if you win, it's like, oh, winning's the only thing that matters. Because if winning's the only thing that matters, then losing should be the only thing that matters, right? So I think, if they do something good in the tournament or if they do something good against Auburn, you've got to fix all those problems. You got to win the right way because you're not just going to, like, Alabama can bail itself out by hitting 18 threes in a game. And not everyone can do that. And it's hard to lose a game when you're just on fire from 3, So I think you're going to have to, like you said, fix those problems, those second half breakdowns, the hustle plays, just kind of going dead at times. It's, you're going to have to kind of look for those more than a win. Obviously you want to beat Auburn. Obviously you want to, I mean, shoot, they could still win an SEC title, a tournament title, but they could still do that. I think the more important thing, especially when you talk about the seeding, it's already pretty much set, is that they start doing the winning traits heading into the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, and I mean, frankly, in the games where they have hit that close to 18 threes number, I mean, they hit a bunch of threes in that second half rally against Auburn. They hit a bunch of threes against Missouri, but those were also games where they struggled to make layups and they struggled on the glass. So, it's not necessarily a team. They haven't shot that well from three all year, and like if they are shooting well from three, those things still need to match that. So you're exactly right. Those winning plays still need to happen. I still think there's some good to take away from this game. They only lost by 5 to the number 5 team in the country. LeBaron Philon was awesome. 19-5-4. Once again, he is going to the NBA. Enjoy him while you can, Alabama fans. He's a really, really good player. Mark Sears, 30 points on senior night. It's his 5th game in a row against a ranked team where he scored more than 20. That's extending like a 20-year-old SEC record. He was phenomenal. Only 2 of 10 from 3, and to still get 30 points is pretty remarkable. And then, we didn't get an update from him after the game. I know he either knocked heads or got hit in the head at some point. Aiden Sherrill was phenomenal in this game, I thought. 10 points, 10 minutes, plus 6. Didn't get a rebound, which I guess you would have liked to have seen more from that, speaking of the effort on the glass. But, that's really promising if you need to get more on the boards to have that guy being able to do that against a top 5 team. I thought he had a good game. So those were my 3 kind of individuals. It was a nice moment for Mark. He got asked some questions after the game, said Coleman will always be his home too, which was nice. But those 3 were my 3 positives from that game.
Did Sherrill check back into the game after that injury?
I could not remember. I was trying to figure that out after, and I'd have to go back and look, but I don't know. I don't believe so.
Because that could be a little bit, the last thing you want is to lose him. And
right.
I mean, that's a whole nother element.
Just
I'm going to go back
in.
Right. I'm going to go back in and kind of check that. See.
Yeah.
No, I don't think he did, because he subbed out 13-57 in the second half.
Second half. Yep.
Yeah. So that's something to monitor. If you're without him, granted, he did not really play in the Auburn game. So maybe,
right. Didn't play at all.
If he is dealing with some kind of concussion thing, then, maybe they won't miss it against Auburn. He'll have some time to get back. But we saw Latrell Wrightsell deal with the concussion thing, and that really kind of hurt him in the tournament. So hopefully they don't have to deal with that again.
Yeah, they can't escape the concussions. Although rallying around Wrightsell kind of helped propel them, it seemed like, in the dance. So maybe in a weird spin zone.
They had a lot more depth at that position than they do at the center position. So I think losing, you could almost make the argument that losing Sherrill from a depth perspective would be a little bit worse than losing Wrightsell.
No,
not
for
from
sure.
Importance perspective.
Alabama's got to find a response. They play Auburn at 1:30 in Neville Arena. They, of course, lost back in February to the Tigers. SEC seeding-wise, the Tide can get the 3 or the 4 seed. They will get the 3 seed if they manage to beat Auburn, or if the lowest-ranked team in the SEC, South Carolina, has a little magic left in them and knocks off Tennessee. Those are the only real scenarios you're kind of watching for. Otherwise, it's just who Alabama is going to end up playing on Friday. They've already got the double bye locked up. So there's your tournament scenario. We'll see what Nate Oats can muster. Maybe it's another 2-day rest period. I don't know. But he's going to have to come up with some sort of answers to at least get some good momentum heading into the postseason play. But then again, didn't do that last year, and they still went to the Final Four. The conundrum of Alabama basketball continues, folks. But we'll keep covering it. We'll have a ton from Nate. We'll speak to him on Friday ahead of the Auburn game. So go subscribe to Tide Illustrated there. Football is actually off for a little bit, so we'll have a bunch of hoops coverage heading into the SEC tournament, and then football will come back the week after. So perfect kind of timing there. But plenty to subscribe for over on Tide Illustrated. Give us a follow on Spotify if you're listening along to the podcast. Subscribe on YouTube. Comment, what are your thoughts on Bama's situation, hoops-wise? Thoughts on Ryan Grubb if you listen to his press conference. You can also find that on our YouTube channel. We posted the whole thing. So, yeah, plenty of content for you guys. We'll see how Alabama basketball responds. We'll see what more we get from spring practice. Until next time, see you later.